The courtroom in downtown Phoenix, Arizona, fell into absolute silence. Judge Patricia Hendricks leaned forward, her reading glasses catching the fluorescent light as she looked down at the small figure standing before her. The girl was 12 years old, with dark brown hair pulled into a neat ponytail, wearing a simple blue dress that looked 2 sizes too big. Her name was Sophie Hartwell, and every eye in courtroom 4B was fixed on her trembling frame. "Sophie," the judge said, her voice gentle but carrying the weight of authority, "you've heard both sides. You know what's at stake here. I'm going to ask you a question, and I need you to answer honestly from your heart." The girl's small hands gripped the wooden railing in front of her. Her knuckles went white. "Who do you want to live with, your mother or your father?" The silence stretched. 10 seconds. 20. The court reporter's fingers hovered over the keys, waiting. Sophie's mother, Diana Hartwell, sat at the plaintiff's table, mascara already smudged from tears, her manicured hands clasped together as if in prayer. On the other side, her father, Richard Hartwell, sat stone-faced in an expensive charcoal suit, his jaw clenched so tight you could see the muscle twitching. Then Sophie opened her mouth, and what came out wasn't what anyone expected. "Neither." The word hung in the air like a gunshot. Diana gasped. Richard's expression cracked for the first time all day. The judge's eyebrows rose slightly, but she remained composed. "Neither of them?" Sophie continued, her voice growing stronger. "I don't want to live with either one of them, and if you make me choose, I'll run away. I promise you, I will." Before we dive into why this 12-year-old girl just rejected both of her parents in open court and what dark secret she was about to reveal that would change everything, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Please hit that subscribe button to help us grow. Stories like Sophie's need to be told, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Now, let's go back to where this heartbreaking custody battle began and discover what drove an entire courtroom to tears by the end of the day. 3 months earlier, the Hartwell family had looked perfect from the outside. They lived in a sprawling ranch-style home in Scottsdale, one of Phoenix's wealthiest suburbs, complete with a swimming pool, a 3-car garage, and a view of Camelback Mountain. Richard was a senior partner at one of Arizona's most prestigious law firms, pulling in over $500,000 a year. Diana was a former model turned lifestyle influencer with over 200,000 followers watching her curate the perfect life on social media. And Sophie? Sophie was the invisible thread holding together a family that had been unraveling for years. She woke up every morning at 6, made her own breakfast because her mother was usually still asleep, and her father left for the office before dawn. She walked herself to Desert Ridge Middle School, a 20-minute trek through perfectly manicured neighborhoods where every house looked the same. She came home to an empty house, did her homework alone, microwaved her dinner, and went to bed listening to her parents argue through the walls. They never argued about the important things, not directly. They argued about whose turn it was to pick up the dry cleaning, about whether the landscapers were doing a good enough job, about who forgot to pay the pool maintenance company. But underneath every petty fight was the real truth. They couldn't stand each other anymore, and they both knew it. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night in late August. Sophie was in her room, headphones on, trying to drown out another fight. This one was about a credit card bill. Diana had spent $8,000 on a handbag. Richard called her irresponsible. Diana called him controlling. Their voices rose, sharp and cruel, cutting through even the loudest music Sophie could play. Then she heard something shatter. Glass, probably, one of the expensive vases in the living room. Then silence. A door slammed. An engine started. Tires screeched out of the driveway. Sophie took off her headphones and waited. When she finally crept downstairs 30 minutes later, she found her mother sitting on the white leather couch, surrounded by shards of broken crystal, crying into her phone. "I want a divorce," Diana was saying. "I don't care what it costs. I want out." That's when Sophie's life fell apart. The divorce proceedings started fast and turned ugly even faster. Richard hired the most aggressive attorney in Phoenix, a woman named Gloria Hastings, who had a reputation for destroying opposing parties. Diana countered with Philip Greenwood, a smooth-talking lawyer who specialized in high-net-worth divorces and knew exactly how to weaponize sympathy. Neither of them hired lawyers who cared about Sophie. The first custody hearing was in October. Sophie wasn't allowed to attend. Instead, she sat in the courthouse hallway with a court-appointed social worker, a tired-looking woman named Karen, who kept asking her surface-level questions about school and hobbies. Sophie answered politely, saying nothing that mattered, because she had learned by then that adults didn't really want to hear the truth. They wanted to hear whatever made their jobs easier. Inside the courtroom, the battle raged. Richard's lawyer argued that Diana was an unfit mother, neglectful, materialistic, more concerned with her social media image than her daughter's well-being. Diana's lawyer painted Richard as an absent workaholic who valued money over family, a man who couldn't even name his daughter's teachers or best friends. Both of them were right. Judge Patricia Hendricks, a woman in her late 50s with short silver hair and eyes that had seen too many broken families, listened to both sides and ordered a temporary custody arrangement. Sophie would spend weekdays with her mother and weekends with her father until a final decision could be made. A child psychologist would be brought in to evaluate the home environments. Another hearing would be scheduled in January. Sophie said nothing when they told her. She just nodded and went back to school the next day like everything was normal. But nothing was normal. Living between two houses meant living nowhere. Her mother's new apartment was smaller, a 2-bedroom condo in Tempe with beige walls and cheap furniture. Diana tried to make it fun, constantly suggesting girls' nights and shopping trips and spa days, but Sophie could see the desperation in her eyes. Her mother needed Sophie to choose her, needed validation that she was the better parent, and every conversation felt like a test. Her father's new place was worse in different ways. He'd moved into a luxury high-rise in downtown Phoenix, all glass and steel and expensive emptiness. He had a guest room set up for Sophie, but it felt like a hotel, impersonal, cold, like he'd hired a decorator to create what he thought a 12-year-old girl's room should look like. Pink walls, a white canopy bed, stuffed animals she'd never seen before arranged on shelves. Sophie hated it. Worse than the houses were the interrogations. Every time she came back from her father's, her mother would ask questions. Not, "How was your weekend?" but, "Did he say anything about me? Did he have anyone over? What did you eat? Did he make you call him dad or father?" And when Sophie went to her dad's, he did the same thing, peppering her with casual questions designed to gather ammunition. She learned to lie. Small lies, careful lies, the kind that wouldn't get back to either parent. She became a ghost, floating between two worlds belonging to neither. The child psychologist, Dr. Dr. Hugh Morrison, came in November. He was in his 40s with thinning hair and the kind of patient smile that was supposed to be comforting but felt condescending. He met with Sophie 3 times, each session an hour long, in a bland office that smelled like lavender air freshener. "Tell me about your home life," he said during the first session. "It's fine," replied Sophie. "Do you feel safe with your mother?" "Yes." "Do you feel safe with your father?" "Yes." "If you could choose, who would you want to live with?" Sophie looked at him, this stranger who had the power to decide her entire future, and realized that telling the truth would only make things worse. So she said what she'd been coached to say by both parents, sometimes within hours of each other. "I love them both equally." Dr. Morrison wrote something in his notebook. Sophie never found out what. By December, the fighting had escalated, not between her parents, they weren't allowed to communicate directly anymore, between their lawyers. Every week brought new motions, new accusations, new ways to hurt each other using Sophie as the weapon. Richard's legal team subpoenaed Diana's financial records and discovered she'd spent over $60,000 in 3 months. Luxury purchases, spa treatments, dinners at expensive restaurants, all of it charged to credit cards that Richard was still technically responsible for. They presented this in court as evidence of financial irresponsibility. Diana's lawyer countered by bringing in Sophie's school counselor, who testified Sophie had missed 17 days of school in the fall semester and her grades had dropped from straight A's to C's and D's. They blamed Richard's demanding weekend visitation schedule, claiming Sophie was exhausted from constantly moving between houses. Neither side mentioned that Sophie had stopped caring about school because she no longer saw the point in trying. The truth was simpler and sadder than any lawyer's argument. Sophie was drowning, and both of her parents were too busy fighting to notice. She started having panic attacks in November. The first one happened during lunch at school. She was sitting with her friends, or the people who used to be her friends before the divorce made her weird and distant, when suddenly her chest tightened and she couldn't breathe. The world tilted, her vision narrowed. She thought she was dying. The school nurse called her mother. Diana showed up 40 minutes later, annoyed because she'd been in the middle of filming a sponsored post about skincare. She took Sophie home, told her she was probably just stressed, and suggested she try meditation. Then she went back to editing her video. Sophie didn't tell her about the second panic attack, or the third, or the ones that started happening almost every night as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if there was any way out of this nightmare that didn't involve choosing which parent to betray. She started researching emancipation laws online. In Arizona, you had to be at least 16. She was 4 years too young. She looked into living with relatives, but her mother's family had sided with Diana, her father's family had sided with Richard, and none of them seemed to care what Sophie actually wanted. So she made a plan, a desperate, terrible plan born from months of feeling like she had no control over her own life. She would tell the truth, all of it, no matter what it cost. The final custody hearing was scheduled in the first week of January, right after New Year's. Both sides prepared their closing arguments. Dr. Morrison submitted his evaluation, which somehow managed to say nothing useful in 23 pages of psychological jargon. The basic conclusion was that both parents loved their daughter and both homes were adequate, so the decision should rest on practical factors like school district and work schedules. Sophie wasn't allowed to read the evaluation, but she heard her mother crying about it on the phone. Apparently, Dr. Morrison had noted that Diana's lifestyle was somewhat narcissistic and her emotional availability was inconsistent. He'd also noted that Richard's work demands left him with limited quality time, and his communication style with Sophie was emotionally distant. In other words, they were both failing her, just in different ways. The night before the hearing, Sophie couldn't sleep. She lay in her mother's guest room, the one with the beige walls and the IKEA furniture, and thought about what she was going to do. She was terrified, not from the courtroom or the judge or even her parents' reactions. She was terrified that after everything, it wouldn't matter, that she would tell the truth and the adults would dismiss it, ignore it, explain it away as a child's confusion. But she had to try. Before we continue with what happened when Sophie stood before that judge and revealed the devastating truth that no one saw coming, I need you to do something. If this story is touching your heart, if you believe children like Sophie deserve better, hit that like button right now. Drop a comment telling me what you think should happen next. And if you haven't already, smash that subscribe button because the ending of this story will leave you absolutely speechless. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens in the next few minutes. Now, let's get back to that courtroom in Phoenix, where a 12-year-old girl is about to change everything. The morning of the hearing, Diana insisted on dressing Sophie in the blue dress, the one that was too big, the one that made her look younger and more vulnerable. "You need to look like a little girl," Diana had said while brushing Sophie's hair. "Judges are more sympathetic to little girls." Richard had sent a text that morning. "Remember what we talked about. Tell the truth about your mother's boyfriend." Sophie deleted both messages and got in the car. The Maricopa County Family Court building was an ugly concrete structure in downtown Phoenix, all hard angles and bulletproof glass. Sophie had been here twice before for preliminary hearings, but this time felt different, final, like a door was closing and whatever was on the other side would be permanent. They went through security, metal detectors, bag searches, the whole routine, then up to the 4th floor, down a hallway that smelled like floor polish and stale coffee, into Courtroom 4B. The room was smaller than Sophie expected, wood paneling on the walls, fluorescent lights that hummed softly, uncomfortable wooden benches that reminded her of church. Her mother sat on the left side with her lawyer, already dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Her father sat on the right with his lawyer, his face a mask of professional composure. Neither of them looked at each other. Neither of them looked at Sophie. Judge Hendricks entered at exactly 9 o'clock. Everyone stood. The bailiff recited the case number. They sat back down. The judge shuffled papers, made some preliminary remarks, and then looked directly at Sophie. "Miss Hartwell," she said, "I've read all the reports, I've heard from both attorneys, I've reviewed Dr. Morrison's evaluation, but before I make my final decision, I want to hear from you, not your mother, not your father, not their lawyers, you." Sophie stood up. Her legs felt shaky. The court reporter positioned her fingers over the keys. The bailiff watched from his corner. Every person in that room was waiting. "Come up here, please," Judge Hendricks said, gesturing to a small podium in front of the bench. Sophie walked forward. The distance felt like miles. When she reached the podium, she had to stand on her tiptoes to see over it properly. She felt ridiculous, like a little kid playing dress-up in adult court. "Now," the judge continued, her voice gentler now, "I know this is difficult. I know both your parents love you very much, but you're 12 years old, and in Arizona, that means your preference carries significant weight in custody decisions. So I'm going to ask you directly, and I want you to answer honestly. Who do you want to live with, your mother or your father?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Sophie could hear her mother's breathing, quick and shallow. She could feel her father's eyes boring into the side of her head. She could sense both lawyers leaning forward, ready to object or celebrate, depending on what came out of her mouth. And then she said it. "Neither." The word cracked through the courtroom like lightning. Diana let out a small cry. Richard's lawyer half stood, then sat back down. Judge Hendricks's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes, surprise maybe, or respect. "Neither of them," Sophie continued, her voice steadier now. "I don't want to live with either of them, and if you make me choose, I'll run away. I promise you, I will." "Sophie," her mother gasped. "Honey, you don't mean that." "Miss Hartwell," the judge cut in sharply, "you will not speak unless I ask you a question." She turned back to Sophie. "Go on, Sophie, I'm listening." Sophie took a deep breath. This was it, the moment she'd been planning for, dreading, hoping for. She gripped the edge of the podium. "Everyone keeps asking me who I want to live with," she said. "My mom's lawyer asks me, my dad's lawyer asks me, the therapist asks me, even my friends ask me, but nobody asks the right question." "What's the right question?" Judge Hendricks asked quietly. "Why did this happen?" Sophie's voice cracked. "Why did they get divorced? And don't tell me it's because adults sometimes grow apart or whatever. That's a lie." Her mother started crying harder. Her father's jaw clenched tighter. The judge simply nodded. "Continue." "They got divorced because they hate each other more than they love me," Sophie said, and the words felt like pulling glass from a wound. "And they've spent the last 3 months proving it over and over again." "Sophie," Richard began. "Mr. Hartwell," the judge said coldly, "one more interruption and you'll be removed from this courtroom. Sophie, please go on." Sophie wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "My mom doesn't want custody because she loves me. She wants custody because she wants to hurt my dad. She wants to prove that she's the better parent, that the divorce wasn't her fault, that she's the victim." Every time I come home from Dad's, she interrogates me. She wants me to say bad things about him. She wants ammunition." Diana was sobbing now, shaking her head. "No, no, that's not true." "And my dad's the same way," Sophie continued, ignoring her mother. "He doesn't want custody because he wants to spend time with me. He wants custody because I'm an asset, proof that he's a good person, that he's a family man, that the divorce didn't ruin him. He asks me about Mom's boyfriends. He wants me to testify about her spending. He wants to win." Richard's face had gone pale. His lawyer whispered something to him. He didn't respond. "Neither of them want me," Sophie said, her voice breaking completely now. "They want to beat each other, and I'm just the trophy they're fighting over." The courtroom was dead silent. Even the court reporter had stopped typing, her hands frozen over the keys. Judge Hendricks leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. "Sophie," she said after a long moment, "those are very serious accusations. Can you give me specific examples?" Sophie nodded. She'd prepared for this. "Last month, my mom threw a birthday party for me. She didn't ask me who I wanted to invite. She invited all her influencer friends and their kids, people I've never met. She spent $5,000 on decorations and a cake and a photographer, but the whole party she was taking pictures and videos for Instagram. She barely talked to me. When I told her I wanted to leave, she got mad and said I was being ungrateful." Diana made a choking sound. Sophie ignored her. "And my dad's the same way," Sophie continued, ignoring her mother. "2 weeks ago, my dad took me to dinner for the first time in a month. I thought maybe we were actually going to talk, but the whole time he was on his phone, taking work calls, checking emails. When I asked him to put the phone away, he said he was working hard to provide for me. Then he asked me if Mom's boyfriend had stayed over the night before." Richard closed his eyes. "They use me to hurt each other every single day, and the worst part is they don't even realize they're doing it. Or maybe they do realize it and they just don't care." Judge Hendricks was quiet for a long time. Then she asked, "If you don't want to live with either parent, where do you want to live?" Sophie had thought about this question for weeks. "My grandma," she said, "my dad's mom. She lives in Tucson. She's been calling me every week since the divorce started. She actually asks me how I'm doing. She doesn't ask me about my parents. She just cares." Judge Hendricks made a note. "Your paternal grandmother. Is she willing to take custody?" "I don't know," she admitted. "We haven't asked her, but I think she would." Judge Hendricks turned to Richard's lawyer. "Can you contact your client's mother and find out if she would be willing to take temporary custody while we sort this out?" The lawyer nodded, already pulling out her phone. The judge then looked at both parents. Her expression was harder than stone. "I want to be very clear about something. What I just heard from this child is one of the saddest things I've encountered in 20 years on the bench. A 12-year-old girl just stood in my courtroom and told me she would rather live with her grandmother than either of her parents. Not because her parents are abusive, not because they're neglectful in the traditional sense, but because they're so consumed with their hatred for each other that they've forgotten to love their daughter." Diana was openly weeping. Richard stared at his hands. "I'm going to order an immediate recess," the judge continued. "During this recess, I want Mr. Hartwell's attorney to contact the paternal grandmother and determine her willingness to provide temporary housing. I also want both of you," she pointed at Diana and Richard, "to think very carefully about what your daughter just said, because when we reconvene in 1 hour, I'm going to make a decision, and I promise you it won't be the decision either of you expected." The gavel struck. Everyone stood. Sophie walked out of the courtroom feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. The hallway was chaos. Diana tried to hug Sophie, but Sophie stepped back. "Don't," she said quietly. Diana's face crumpled. Richard approached next, and Sophie held up a hand. "I meant what I said in there," she told him. "Both of you need to figure out what you actually want, because it's not me." She walked away before either of them could respond. 55 minutes later, everyone returned to the courtroom. Richard's lawyer stood and announced that Sophie's grandmother, Dorothy Hartwell, had agreed to take temporary custody. She was already on her way up from Tucson and would arrive by that evening. Judge Hendricks nodded. "Very well, here is my decision." The room held its breath. "We are giving temporary full custody to Dorothy Hartwell for a period of 6 months. During this time, both parents will be allowed supervised visitation, 2 hours per week, each parent separately, supervised by a court-appointed monitor. Both parents will also be required to attend family counseling, individually and with Sophie, with a therapist of the court's choosing." Diana started to object. The judge held up a hand. "Furthermore," she continued, "at the end of 6 months, we will reconvene and assess whether either parent has demonstrated the emotional maturity necessary to provide primary custody. If not, custody will remain with the grandmother until Sophie turns 18. The gavel struck again. Final. Sophie felt something break open inside her chest. Not grief, not relief, but something in between. A door opening, a possibility. After the hearing, after the lawyers left and the courtroom emptied, Sophie sat on a bench in the hallway waiting for her grandmother. Her parents were somewhere else in the building, probably with their attorneys, probably already planning appeals. But for the first time in months, Sophie wasn't thinking about them. Judge Hendricks walked past on her way out. She paused, looked at Sophie, and sat down beside her. "That was very brave, what you did in there," the judge said quietly. "I was terrified," I admitted. "Brave people usually are." The judge was quiet for a moment. "Can I tell you something, off the record?" Sophie nodded. "I see a lot of custody cases, hundreds of them, and most of the time children say what they think the adults want to hear. They try to keep everyone happy. They try not to make waves. But you did something different. You told the truth, even knowing it would hurt. That takes a kind of courage most adults don't have." "Will they hate me now?" Sophie asked. "Maybe, for a while," the judge said honestly, "but sometimes people need to hear the truth before they can change. Your parents love you, Sophie, I do believe that, but right now they love their anger more. Maybe this will be the wake-up call they need." A woman appeared at the end of the hallway. She was in her late 60s, with short white hair and kind eyes, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt. She was moving fast, her face creased with worry. "Grandma," Sophie said, standing up. Dorothy Hartwell swept her granddaughter into a hug, the kind of hug that felt like coming home. She smelled of lavender and baking bread and safety. "I've got you," Dorothy whispered. "I've got you, baby girl. You're safe now." And for the first time in 6 months, Sophie believed it. 6 months passed. Sophie lived with her grandmother in a modest house in Tucson, with a backyard full of cacti and a front porch swing where they drank lemonade and talked about everything and nothing. Her parents visited, supervised sessions in a sterile office with a therapist watching. The first few visits were awkward and painful. Diana cried a lot. Richard apologized, stiffly at first, then more genuinely. Slowly, incrementally, things began to shift. In therapy, Diana confronted the truth that she'd been using Sophie as validation, trying to prove her worth as a mother to compensate for her failed marriage. She started seeing her own therapist. She scaled back the Instagram influencer lifestyle. She got a job at an art gallery. Richard admitted that he'd been absent, that his obsession with work was a way of avoiding dealing with his feelings about the divorce. He cut back his hours at the firm. He started actually listening when Sophie talked, instead of planning his next question. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a happy ending where everyone hugged and the family got back together, but it was real. It was progress. At the 6-month hearing, Judge Hendricks reviewed the reports from the therapists and the supervised visitation monitors. She looked at Sophie, who was sitting between her parents this time instead of alone at the podium. "How are things, Sophie?" the judge asked. "Better," Sophie said. "Not perfect, but better." "Do you want to go back to living with one of your parents?" Sophie looked at her mother, then her father. They both looked back at her. Really looked at her, and she saw something she hadn't seen before, genuine care without the agenda. "Not yet," Sophie said carefully. "I think we still need more time, but I believe we're getting there." The judge smiled. "Then we'll extend the arrangement another 6 months and see where we are." The gavel struck. After the hearing, the 3 of them, Sophie, Diana, and Richard, walked out of the courthouse together. They didn't go their separate ways immediately. Instead, they stood on the courthouse steps in the Phoenix sunshine, and Richard said, "Sophie, I'm sorry for all of it." "Me too," Diana added, tears streaming down her face. "We failed you, baby. We got so lost in hurting each other that we forgot you were the one who mattered most." Sophie looked at both of them. "I know," she said, "but you're trying now. That's what matters." And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was the beginning of something better. Judge Patricia Hendricks watched from the courthouse window as the 3 of them walked away together, still separate but moving in the same direction. She'd been doing this job for 2 decades, and she'd seen countless families destroyed by divorce. But every once in a while, she saw something else, a family that broke, then found a way to rebuild. Not the same as before, but maybe stronger for having been broken. Sophie Hartwell's story reminds us that children are not pawns in adult games. They are people with voices, feelings, needs that go far beyond the legal definitions of custody and visitation. Her courage to speak the truth, painful, ugly, necessary truth, gave her family a chance to heal. Not quickly, not easily, but genuinely. And it also reminds us that the legal system, for all its flaws, can sometimes get it right when judges are willing to listen to the smallest voices in the room. If you were the judge in this case, what would you have decided? Would you have sent Sophie to live with her grandmother or made a different choice? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story moved you, if it made you think about how we treat children in custody battles, then make sure you're subscribed to this channel. Hit that notification bell so you never miss another story about ordinary people facing extraordinary choices. Thank you for watching. Remember, every child deserves to be heard, not just used as a weapon. Every family deserves a chance to heal, even when they're broken. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is tell the truth, no matter how much it hurts. Share this video with someone who needs to hear Sophie's story, because somewhere out there, there's another child sitting in another courtroom, waiting for someone to ask them the right question. Until next time, stay safe, stay strong, and never underestimate the courage of a 12-year-old girl who refused to be a trophy.